Ladies and gentlemen, welcome this afternoon. Thank you for indulging me in these little technical glitches, but it's a beautiful day, and it's greatly appreciated that you would consider to spend your valuable time with us here. And again, this includes the North American community for sure, and it also includes Central and South American community, and of course the other communities around the world that makes this meeting such an outstanding success. And I say outstanding success because I'm seeing the benefits with all the other knowledge seekers. I mean, we have to remember that maybe we only have about 5% of the population who is aware of the plasma science, and of course this is due to factors that we're all familiar with. But nevertheless, we persevere and we teach so that the newcomers can hopefully fast track faster than what we did and what we've been doing for the many years that we've put in. And it's not a complaint, it's an advancement, because this is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute Plasma Science Teachings. We're now at the intermediate EARTHSPACE level, and the discussion today is going to be about polarity. And my name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is November the 13th, 2022. This is the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So, as we said, we are trying to fast track and condense thousands of hours into teaching. And obviously, I'm trying to present a different point of view and a different kind of understanding to try and bring in our relationship with the rapid advancements that we're seeing at the KAKT Foundation. And as part of the Intermediate EARTHSPACE series, this has been a path that we did with the intermediate teaching, understanding, knowing, insight, and of course the basic outer space series. And please remember that all of these teachings are really very basic compared to the knowledge that is waiting for us. And so we're just trying to enhance our awareness and enhance our understanding so that we can kind of keep up. And we will keep up because we have no choice. We're all searching for outer space, and we all want that piece of pie in the sky. The problem is our schemes are so small. It's that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner of man's universe. And we're looking at the vast expanse of the Creator's universe, and we're seeing that we're just settling for crumbs. And the reason for it is because we're never asking the tough questions, and we need to ask more questions. And I'm trying to, through these series, provide more answers. But I think what we're doing is actually providing more questions. And so it's the kind of questions that we're talking about. The source, the universal order of creation of matters. Where do you talk about the source? And what about the soul, the origin of the universe, and how you got here? And speaking of how you got here, there had to be a methodology. And so we find in book number 2, the structure of the light, the link. And so as we're talking about our little piece of the pie, and then, we keep doing dreaming, and we're looking for that phantom pie. Not only do we not know where it is, we don't know what it looks like. And so we call it a phantom because it's something that's impaired to the senses, but has no substantial existence. And we know that, there are satellites that are in the sky. Are they the pie in the sky? Because we don't see the connections, right? But then on the other hand, the satellites become spaceships, and we still don't see the connections. And then, we are already dream satellites because we experience this every night. And we know that this dream reality is in between the military height, shall we say, and the satellite height. That is all part of the atmosphere. And so the dream satellite pathway is within the atmosphere of the planet, but we can travel. So then the question is, from this dimension and to another dimension, we have to question which dimension is the reality dimension. And then we find that somehow, some way, our planet is rotating around an axis. We call that a pole. But we also have a magnetic pole. And now we have to ask another question. Which reality are these poles operating in? So fortunately for us, we didn't have this answer when we got here. We just got here because we had this sentimental pie in the sky, which we call Earth. And we defined Earth by creating boundaries. And first of all, before we create the Earth boundary, we had to figure out what we are doing with our neighbors. And so we found that Venus is, well, that's not Earth, and Mars, well, that's not Earth. And then we found that in between somewhere was Earth. And that's where we came. And we came there with a sentimentality. Well, that's okay. But how did we get here? And so the real reality that we're all seeking, and what we discovered in our basic teaching, is that outer space is not a place. Outer space is a method of energy transfer. And so the discussion has never wavered. We are talking about energy in motion. And so one of the ways we have energy in motion on this planet is through energy transmission. And, isn't it interesting that we use telephone poles to do that? We also use satellites to do that. But we're going to be talking about the poles, not the transmission, because the poles themselves are transition poles. Transition meaning perpendicular to the surface of the Earth. So these poles that we talk about, of course, when you have a compass, you set the poles, so the North Pole, South Pole, East Pole, West Pole, but we refer everything to the North Pole because that's the way the Earth rotates, and we know which way the Earth rotates because the sun keeps coming up in the east and sets in the west. But there's a magnetic pole. And so they call it the magnetic north, but in the plasma science, the magnetic north is the magnetical pole, and the magnetic south is the gravitational pole. And so we have a relationship between these two poles. And the thing is that these poles wobble. And it's the gap in between the two poles. And ironically, they create a little pie. Well, maybe that's the pie in the sky that we're looking for. The thing is that these poles are not physical. And so this gap is not physical. And this field in between these two poles is not physical. Well, if it's not physical, then it's plasmatic. And so these fields working together create this pie structure. And we find that one is magnetical and one is gravitational. But there's a wobble with these poles. So more questions. Which pole wobbles? Is it the true north rotating axis pole, or is it the magnetical pole? And does this pole wobble affect the heartbeat? We all know that the heartbeat can accelerate or decelerate depending on the environment. Or is it the pole wobble itself that is the heartbeat? Because of this wobble, we know that the wobble is essential for life on this planet. And we know that because we have an anomaly on the moon. which does not rotate. So there is no day and night. And there is a dark side and a light side, but there is an in-between side. And in that in-between side, there is light and day. And the reason that happens is because the moon also has a pole wobble. So if the heartbeat is essential for life, and if the wobble is essential for life, maybe the pole wobble is the heartbeat. But when you look at the biodiversity, we are in heaven. And so the thing about it, of course, is that the Earth rotates around the axis, which is the rotating pole. So the wobble at one point is on the right side, and another time it's on the left side. But it's still always the magnetical north and the gravitational south. It's just now that the pie is getting bigger. So what we need to do today is investigate this and see what the ramifications are of this wobble, this beautiful wobble pie. So let's remember that the creation of the universe exists from energy, and energy is always in motion. And because it's in motion, we have to go to or come from somewhere. So there's something that we have to combine with. And since all of the universe exists from energy, then all things work in combination. And so as newcomers to the knowledge ask you to define plasma, and they give you that magical 35 seconds to explain to them thousands of hours of teaching, you say it's a kind of energy state. And there are different kinds of energy states. Now, the energy states that are shown here are simply the energy states that we've discussed, but they come nowhere near to all the energy states. And most of us are not going to be bothered with identifying these states. What is important is our point of view. And our point of view is manipulated through our understanding of the Earth space. And it's hard to understand the Earth space, so it makes finding our inner space even that much more hard. But then, of course, if we find our inner space, we will find the key to the gateway to outer space. And this is really important because this is the essence of life. And if life is not important, well, nothing's important. So we have to understand the basic rules, and we repeat them, and we have to repeat them every week because we always have new people coming in. But this review is very important because we have to understand how these rules affect our subject matter. So for instance, the energy states can increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude, but the ultimate rule, the higher energy state feeds the weaker energy state. So, how does this work with the poles, for instance? Is one pole a higher energy state than the other? Is one pole feeding the other? Is the interaction of the two poles manifesting an energy state change? And so I submit that it is, because we have natural creation and we have natural decay. But then we look at the sun, and it's hard to tell which is the North Pole for the sun because it's catalytic, it's non-consuming, and it comes up every day and leaves every night, and it continues to give. And so the way it gives in a higher plasma state. And this higher plasma state is higher by many orders of magnitude. So the higher state feeds the weaker state, so the sun is feeding the earth. And this plasma, we can absorb it in a field, or we could choose not to absorb it by creating a barrier of these fields. But the ultimate decision maker really is this ethos of the universe, because the plasma is bound to the ethos of the universe. And it is because of the ethos of the universe that creation happens. These are the rules. And so we compare those rules to our Earth space, and we find that there's a discrepancy, there's an inconsistency. And then the point that really matters, of course, is our space, man's space. And so we find that our own space is following the same principles, but we have to take into account the Earth space. And so let's leave the man space and discuss that more later, because the Earth space is where we are. We decided to come here. And not only us, but we also have the moon space. And funny enough, we chose to come within the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is between the magnetosphere and the crust. And so the moon space is beyond the magnetosphere, what we call the in-between space. And so below the crust is the magmasphere, which we call the Earth brain. And so all of these spheres of reference are based on density. And the more dense it is, the more gravitational it is. So that's why the moon is a satellite, and it's a satellite around the Earth. The question becomes, we don't rotate around the Earth the same way as a satellite does. We have mobility. And so there's a clear difference. And this is one of the reasons that I want to talk about poles today, because the pole, the main axis pole, is what the Earth rotates around. So how does the magnetical pole work? And so we find that there's a relationship in what we call the fundamental principles of the twinity, where we have the speed of rotation of the plasma is dictated between the electron and the proton. And the magnetical fields are transferred from the large twin plasma of the proton to the smaller twin plasma of the electron. And so we see that the relationship of the electron and proton is what we call an atom. And then when we look at the electron, we find that the electron is the amalgamation of the fields of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And the thing is that each of these components has a pole. We don't know which pole. What we do know is that the electron is considered magnetical and the proton is considered gravitational. We know that the PM ticks are considered magnetical. The rays can be either magnetical or gravitational. And we see that in the ray launch dimension. When we have a decay of a neutron, which is a single component that decays into two components, the electron and the proton, but they work in combination. So it's really the neutron decays into an atom. And as part of this decay process is the release of the PM ticks. One moment. Thank you. So the thing that we didn't discuss today is we didn't discuss charge, because what we want to do is we want to exclude the rotating portion. We're going to discuss that next week. What we want to look at is the polar energy. And so defining the polar energy, we don't say it's north, or we don't say it's magnetical. We say it's an emission pole. And if there's an emission pole, then there's also an absorption pole. So that doesn't tell you if it's the North Pole or the magnetic North Pole. And what's important is to understand right at the bottom of this picture is a little twist. And if energy is in motion, and if energy goes out the emission pole and comes back in through the motion pole, it cannot be the same charge. It can't. So there has to be a twist. So this twist is right in the core. And this core is a transition field. And that's what we're talking about today, the polarity transition field. And so when we look at the emission, we find that the ray emission goes out the y-axis, and the ray absorption comes in at the south side. But we also find that the emission can come between the interaction of two plasmas. And then the ray absorption can be done anywhere. So what defines how this energy is absorbed? Which one is the launch point? Which one is the landing point? And which one is the PM ticks point? Because all of these three represent energy in motion. So which pole are we talking about? And what is its orientation? Because you see, we have a plasmatic reference spectrum. And so within that spectrum, there's an exchange of plasmatic energy. At a lower energy state, we have a physicality spectrum. And there's a relationship between all those fields. And then you take a relationship between the plasmatic spectrum and the physicality spectrum, which we now call the reality dimension. This is the covalent bond dimension. And the reason it's called the reality dimension, A, you can't see it, but two, it's a dimension that links up the plasmatic spectrum with the physicality spectrum. And we haven't decided which dynamic plasma is the reality dimension connected to. Because first of all, the reality dimension is part of our dimension, whether it's Earth space or man space. But the reality dimension is also connected to outer space. In fact, the reality dimension is outer space, as we discussed before. And it is from this outer space that we have this transcending of these various reality dimensions through these energy packs, which we call PM ticks. And they come in different flavors and different strengths, and they contribute to the spice of life. And so the spice of life is really a manifestation of the aminogen structure of each of these PM ticks and how they come together in our indomitable spirit. And they default to the soul pack level that takes into account our environment. And all this is done through the basic plasma feeding rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And it does this through the magnetical plasma fields, which we call attraction and repulsion. Attraction being gravitational and repulsion being magnetical. And so the magnetical is the feeding and the gravitational is the feedback. And so the PM ticks are part of the magnetical feeding process. And to come somewhere, there has to be some kind of matter, some kind of landing spot. And so at that landing spot is the convergence of the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. And once we have the three energy states coming together and they create a maggrav, then we have a balanced field, and that becomes the gravitational field in relation to the PM ticks. But that maggrav has to take into account an environment. That environment is the feedback. And the field feedback with the maggrav field combination is the field interaction, which we call inertia. And this particular field, we can turn it on and turn it off. And we can change the strength, increase it or decrease it. And this will affect the positioning. We can enhance it or diminish it. And so we've said all along that two forces come together. So we have two PM ticks at least. They come together and they create this maggrav condition where we have this X, Y, and Z axis, of which we're talking about the Y axis, polar axis today. And so when these fields come together, they are the embodiment of the universal harvesting, which is self-enhancement. The universal harvesting, what we're talking about is energy. And so when we look at the loosh harvesting that's on this planet, that is the harvesting of energy through self-consumption. And so then we ask these questions. Is it a flash? Is it a glow? Is it a glitter? Well, most importantly, is it profitable, right? And so when we talk about profitability, then we're accounting for or discounting for something to arrive at that decision. But the reality is when you look at whatever you're looking at, it is the product of two plasma fields at least. So that you can bank on. But how many fields more besides that can you account for? And then at what point do you decide which fields do you discount for? So you have to make some decisions because you need a minimum of 2 feeding dimensions, and they give you 3 feedback dimensions because you still have the 2 feeding dimensions. Those 2 feeding dimensions are not dissolved. They don't disappear. If they disappear, then the feedback dimension also has to disappear. So when we look at these 3 dimensions, it means we're none of these 3 dimensions. We're of another dimension because we're of the observer dimension. So any dimension that we look at, which we are not part of, is the 3 dimensions of the feeding feedback dimensions. And so our feedback dimension is this Earth space, and the Earth space is a product of 2 feeding dimensions, the North Pole and the South Pole as the polar axis, and then the magnetic North Pole and the magnetical South Pole as the magnetical axis. And this would account for the variety that we have on this planet. So for instance, we have copper in Chile, and we have gold in the East, and we have oil in the Middle East, let's say, for instance. And so all of these are a product of the plasmatic dimensions. And so they manifest themselves on the Earth space. So if these elements, and oil is not an element, but we're saying it's something that is mined, something that is excavated or exploited. These are all products on the Earth space, and the Earth space itself is a product. And we're only talking about maybe gold, silver, copper, oil. But look at the periodic table of elements. Talk about the variety of Earth space. So we're not talking about what's in the biosphere. We're just talking about what's on the Earth's crust, what's inside the Earth's crust and the elements. And then we're not even talking about the combination of these elements in the physical state. So we have to understand that these elements are created from a plasmatic substructure of at least two dynamic fields. And this is one of the reasons we have two poles. Well, isn't it interesting? We also have two cups of life. And so these two cups of life have an inner space. And at some point, some nebulous point, there's a core space in between the two, but they can stand individually. And so we could produce a zinc GANS and a CO2 GANS. And we can see that this GANS we could put in a glass bottle, which is transparent. And we can see the GANS inside, but then there's a hole in the GANS. And that hole is also transparent. So we have the physicality of the bottle, and that's a feedback. And we have the feeding of the GANS. And then we have this hole, and that's a feedback. But a feedback of what? And so we find that this is all part of the biosphere dimension, where we are feeding the space that we occupy. So one space we occupy is the man space, and the other space we occupy is the environmental space, which we call the Earth space. We're not talking about man space today, we're talking about Earth space, because Earth space has two poles which are manifest into the product we call Earth space. And we see how it works because in the cups of life, we produce a variety of GANSes: copper, calcium, zinc, carbon dioxide, amino acid, and water, just for instance. And then we have another cup of inertia, which is interacting with the environment on the Earth below, which we call the cup of the Earth, right? So our cup of life is interacting with the cup of the Earth and producing the cup of inertia. So when we look at all five of these cups and how they work together, this is a dynamic plasma field, and it's all occupying the three fields of interest: the magnetical field, the gravitational field, and the soul field. We didn't say how many magnetical fields, we didn't say how many gravitational fields, we didn't say how many soul fields, and we're not even discussing poles here. We're discussing a relationship between the cups of the soul, which is the soul, the emotion, and the physicality, with the earth. And the purpose of the earth and our environment on the earth is to be in a feeding system. And so that feeding system is the inertia on this planet, and it's part of the plasma feeding dimension. But it has a deficiency the way it's structured. So something is missing in, shall we say, the translation. And so let's carry on talking about this y-axis pole, because we see the x-axis is transmission, the y-axis is transition, and the z-axis is the field. And so when we look at the problem with the poles, as we discussed in prior classes, we know there's a discussion whether or not poles can flip. And we see that they certainly can flip because we have pole flipping with magnets. But when we look at the Earth and we talk about the possibility of pole flipping, we see evidence within the Earth's crust of magnetical orientation of the atoms. And so we see that there has been many cases of pole flipping in our history. Well, if the North Pole, which is the axis pole, were to flip, it's possible, we presume, that would be chaotic. So I submit that what we're talking about with respect to pole flipping is the magnetical pole flipping. And interestingly enough, we have two hemispheres. And if the hemispheres would have been the same, well, they would repel each other. So one of these has to flip. And when they flip, then we create attraction. And so when we create this attraction, now we have a North Pole and a South Pole. And we'll talk more about this next week. Because what we want to talk about is the principal interaction, which is energy in motion, but it's a two-way street. So in other words, the North Pole, we say, is the emission pole. And so the energy goes out and more goes out. We also bind energy. We have an absorption where energy comes in and more comes in. I apologize, I got these two slides backwards. But nevertheless, there's an emission and an absorption. And in order to have absorption, you have to have emission. Because the maggrav condition was created through the arrival of two PM ticks coming together. And then more energy came in and more energy came in. But in order to maintain this energy, because energy is always in motion, it has to follow a path. And so there has to be a growth to have more energy coming in. And in order to maintain a maggrav condition, you have to stop the feeding. But you can't stop the feeding because the energy is in motion. So then you have to emit. And so that's why energy has to go out as well. So there's absorption and there's emission. But let's understand that through this emission, these are elevating energy paths. We're talking about plasma paths. So this is part of the feeding of the Earth space. As energy comes in and more comes in, and energy goes out and more goes out. And then we see there's a relationship between two fields, a magnetical field and a gravitational field. And then everything else is derived as a product of those fields. But how does that affect the poles? Well, we find that it is this wobble which is life-giving on this planet. And then when we look at the energy flow with this planet as a dynamic plasma, we find that the inner space spectrum is part of the feeding radiance. And then we look at the inner space spectrum as being supplemented by the feedback radiance. And this is what I was talking about before. If you're looking at the individual field and there's an emission and there's an absorption, it cannot be at the same charge. So within the transition of the poles, there has to be that twist. And what we're not saying here, is it the North Pole or is the North Magnetic Pole? And we need to understand that, because you can't have rotation around both poles without having some kind of catastrophe. So when we're looking at the dynamic plasma relationship, that possibility exists. First of all, we have a vertical transition as through the North Pole, but then we also have an Earth space field that is a dynamic plasma relationship with the North Magnetic Pole. And so there's a dynamic plasma relationship, therefore, between the north magnetic pole and the north axis pole. And the byproduct of it is the dynamic plasma field. And the byproduct of that dynamic plasma field is our Earth space. And so all of this is interacting with the core that was created through the arrival of the PM ticks. And then we see through the core interaction, we see that there are different planets. There are different continents on this planet. And there's a relationship with all of these. But because of the orientation of the North Magnetic Pole, we have to alter this. And so the manifestation of these different continents comes about because of the orientation of these poles. And the seasonal adjustments also comes about because of the interaction of these poles. Now, if we add to that component this flatness that is done at the pole level, we find that the Earth is slightly flattened at the poles. So the round diagram becomes more flattened at the poles, and actually the field becomes more elliptic. And if we have a second field that is perpendicular to the first field, we can see that the two fields do not always coincide when they rotate. They coincide at intervals. And so if we were to look at this perpendicular interaction and compare that to the poles, and we say, okay, there's a north pole and there's a north magnetic pole, and let's say there's a wobble that's in the magnetic pole, and it comes to this perpendicular point, and because energy flow is a two-way street, the magnetic pole has to decide if it's going to revert back to its normal position as a north magnetic pole, but now it has the option to flip to be the south magnetic pole. So in fact, the north magnetic pole is a component of the balance plus the residue of the interaction of the north magnetic field and the south magnetic field. So the net result is a magnetic field. Conversely, the south pole becomes a net residue of the interaction of the southern emission field and the magnetical and emission field, and the net result is gravitational. If we were to change the field strength, then the magnetical field would end up being gravitational, and the gravitational field would be magnetical. And this would account for what we see in the crust of the Earth with respect to the magnetic alignment of the atoms. And we see that there have been many historical pole shifts, And they were done exactly that way. There was a flipping of the poles. And so we're talking about the flipping of the magnetical pole. In order for the magnetic pole to flip, it has to wobble. And if it were to wobble from its normal position and go to the 90-degree point perpendicular, it may have enough energy and enough momentum to flip right over. And we know that's possible because we've seen these experiments in the lab where the poles can flip on a dynamic plasma reactor. And so what we're talking about is this wobble interaction and how it's life-giving. And so we have to conclude that the North Pole axis is the rotating pole, and the Earth rotates around that axis. But the magnetical pole is the complementary pole, is the relationship field that is created between the two poles. And if you would notice that if you were to use the North magnetic pole as an arm of the clock, and that you were to take an arc from 12 o'clock and say, take it 90 degrees down to 3 o'clock, and you look at the interaction of those fields, and you will find that it's not uniform. This lack of uniformity contributes to the biodiversity. So in order to have a MAGRAV condition and it to be balanced, it has to be symmetrical. But in this case, it's asymmetrical. And so the asymmetric relationship is what contributes to the life. And this is one of the key features of Earth. So what we're talking about is relationships in all cases. So when we look at the scientific community and they look at exchange of energy as a one-way street and totally discount the, shall we say, the plasma science aspect of it with respect to the souls. And so the spiritual community, they take up the discussion on the souls, but they have no scientific basis to discuss it. And they only look at the spirit, which is the motor of the soul, and they discount the rest. And so we have these two sciences, which the plasma science adds to the knowledge by bringing the two together. And so really the question isn't, can we bring the two sciences together, but the rate of change is the question. And so the rate of change, as we know, is based on field strength. And then if we look at these principal interactions and we understand that it always is in combination, so then we have to understand that if we have one field on one side and another field on another side, and we don't know which field we're talking about, any field we can do, we find that the fields, if they're interacting dynamically, should have some similarity. So we know that we can emit from one dynamic field to another, and we know that we can emit through the reality dimension, and we know that the emission energy is a PM tick, and we know that we can successfully emit the feeding radiance because we get a feedback radiance. And this is how we travel, by perfecting these systems with man-made capabilities and man-made knowledge. And so now we understand that we had, in the beginning, we had the core, And around that core, we built the magnosphere. And then everything else is a byproduct of that. Which came first. So the soul of the earth is in the core. The soul of the earth must have come first because there's a soul sequencing. And the sequence that we have is the same sequence that the vertical and the horizontal people have. And the unique thing that is different between the physical dimension and the plasma dimension is that you can have overlapping fields. And so when we look at it from behind the sun, we can see the sun in front of us, and we can see the earth in front of us, and all the little man space people, and then the moon, and any other satellites or starships. And oh, and there's Mars way down there. All of these fields are overlapping. If we can see all of these fields, the structure of these fields must be the same. We know that they all operate differently, classic case being the moon. But the moon has a wobble. And if it has a wobble, it must have two poles. And just like that, we must have two souls. The soul of the man, that's the essential you. And it interacts with different plasmagen states and different mattergen states. The soul of the body, that's a surrogate you. That is the byproduct that interacts between the plasmagen state and the environment state, which we're talking about, the earth space. And so the manifestation can be a plasmatic reality or a physical reality. But in all cases, the plasma feeding is what leads to this manifestation. And so we see that the manifestation may be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. But there's another field to take account of, and that is the emotion of presence. And we're going to talk more about that in the future, because the emotion of presence is a form artifact also of energy and motion at that manifestation point. So while we're trying to wrap our understanding around is that there's a physical matter state and there's a plasmatic matter state. They are both feeder states. The one matter state is dominant. And so your success in navigating through life is to understand which common denominator are you. So when we look at these phantom fields and we say, okay, well, in our space, we have two souls, two emotions, and two physicalities. So therefore, we have an inner space within an inner space. But we look at Earth space, that's different. We now know that Earth space has to have two emotions because it has a biosphere and a magnosphere. So, and it also has two physicalities. It has a core and it has an atmosphere, and it also has two poles. These two poles are not an inner space within an inner space. They operate differently. And I submit that that is the difference between man space and earth space. So according to the plasma rules, man space and Earth space operate by the same rules, but Earth space has two poles. More questions. So when we look at these relationships and we see that the outer space has to do with the soul of the Earth. And so we're talking about fields, the soul of the sun, soul of the man, soul of the Earth. But when we look at the inner space, we're looking at our soul of the body and also the soul of the Earth body. And then when we're looking at the Earth space physicality, that's the physicality of the Earth body. And that includes an emotional and physical context. And so we also have a physicality of the body, but it operates very different from the physicality of the Earth body. So when we look at the soul sequencing, there is a similarity in the way we came here and the way the Earth was created. So the soul of the solar system plus the soul of the sun is what attracted the soul of the Earth. Now that we have the soul of the Earth, then that with the soul of the sun attracted the soul of the Earth body. And now that we have that, the soul of the Earth body plus the soul of the sun manifests the physicality of the Earth. So how do we know what to account for and what to discount for? Well, it's a good thing we didn't have to ask that question when we arrived, because nuclear science still doesn't have that answer. So what the plasma science is doing is transcending the limitations of nuclear science, because there's an overriding plasma field that has to do with the ethics of the universe, which involves morality, compassion, and courage. And these are all vital elements, vital field strengths that contribute to creation. Without them, the plasma fields stop. And so when we talk about the transcendence to heaven, we see that that transcendence can come at any speed. We haven't decided which speed, but what we know is that it's faster than Earth light. And if we can see Mars, then it's faster than Mars light. And last week we said, well, it's even faster than Nibiru light. How fast is it? Well, we don't know. What we do know is that the manifestation point on this planet in terms of physicality is what is called materialization. And that is the lowest energy level. So in order to come down to an energy, that level, there has to be a convergence of two energies to create the one. But if we want to elevate, then we have to go from two energies and create the one in an opposite direction. So the connection is the peace dome. The peace dome is the dynamic soul of the Earth body. And all the fields in between are overlapping fields. And they go through different ranges, from a magnetical overlapping to a gravitational overlapping. And these are all part of the beauty of life on this planet. And so we are all at the right place at the right time. And it's about time we start to realize that you have to be there and realize that you're there, because that's the only way that we're going to enhance the biosphere of peace. Man's existential crisis defaults to the harvest of the plasma energy of the plasma universe. This is what created the poles in the first place. And so we find that the energy binding that we experience on this planet is not only at the expense of others, but it closes the gates to the universe. It stops the plasma fields from interacting. One side note. We've all heard of lay points. And I'm not going to discuss the veracity of this science, but the conclusions they come to is that there are vortex energy centers around the planet. And these energy centers are at the cross points of these ley lines. So at these cross points, you can imagine a pole orientation. And so these lines would not be the North Pole. They would be the magnetical pole, but not the North magnetical pole, but the magnetical pole that emits from the crust of these ley lines. And so they become an emission or a surface transition. But this is done on a plasma basis. So this is part of the plasma transmutation. So these ley line crossing points, these transition points, are all plasma polar energy centers. And what they've done is connected these vortex energy centers, or which are located at these crossings of the ley lines. And by connecting these ley lines, so this is part of the surface transmission. So the poles are the surface transition, but the lines are part of the surface transmission. And so this is all done on a plasma transmutation basis because we're only talking about the interaction of the poles. And so this is a plasma polar energy connection. So what is interesting is that in Europe, they measure distances by kilometers. And in North America, we measure distances in miles. And in Europe, the cross points of these ley lines had way stations set up for travelers. And eventually these way stations became churches and cathedrals. And when they did a map of the churches across Europe, they found that there was a unique systematic distance between these churches. And it wasn't in kilometers. In Europe, it was in miles. So these pole emission points were substituted for cathedrals. You know, our history was not filled with uneducated or stupid people. It's how we interpret the knowledge where the problem is. Because in our pursuit of happiness, we have a launch field failure, you see, because man has never launched a rocket into outer space. And we can't do that because the morality is missing. The education is limited. And what we account for or discount for is based on what we can plunder. And the proof of concept is, fortunately, we were born. We all went through this experience, and we were born using an outer space system, and we were born into an inner space. In this case, for us, we were born into a womb, but our destination point was Earth space. And so the question becomes, is Earth space the end of the trip, or is it the midway point of the trip? Still asking more questions, but understand this: we are inherently peaceful. So that is the foundation. And this is where the science meets the soul of man for peace. That's the prerequisite. And so we know that we're on the right track because we have visitors who want to come as tourists to see our little heaven here. And they haven't had a chance to do that before. So there has been something lacking, and we are providing that. And they are quite eager to visit heaven. So that's the result of being in the post-June the 6th, 2022 era. We have choices now. We have choices how we travel through outer space, understanding inner space, and becoming more knowledgeable about our home, Earth space, that manifestation point. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're calling all Earth space patriots. The World Peace Treaty is important for the Earth's success. Sign it. Sign it with a pen, sign it with your heart, and sign it with your soul. Understand that the Earth has overlapping fields of life with freedom from boundaries. And this polar flipping, this changes our understanding of the purpose of creation. The earthbound physical and emotional atmospheric transformation that we need is advanced through the transmutation from the transparency point to that manifestation point. So we've seen that volcanoes are part of the healing process of inner space of Earth and connects to that nebulous point of the universal inner space of freedom. So the soul of the Earth feels not only its polar shift, but the polar shift in man's morality, because that's what we're going through. The plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. Again, thank you all for joining me on this trip. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Alex. Was this the novice experience or the intermediate experience?
This was the intermediate experience because we
Gosh,
discussed this before, but we've introduced a new concept here, and that has to do with the plasmatic relationship of the poles and the poles only, because we have our own dynamic plasma field that we have to operate in. But there's a key difference between the man space and the Earth space, and we haven't been able to address that. We're now at the point that we can address that, and we need to address that because we are now going into outer space, and that makes a huge difference. So one of the best ways to learn is to understand better how we got here, and the here got here before us. So how did here get here? And here is Earth space. So I wonder if before Earth space got here, we were someplace else. And where were we then? Well, oh, I'm sorry, I'm asking more questions. But, the thing is, Earth space was here first, but there's a real difference between the way the Earth space works and the way we work. And so I'm pointing that out. Was that was that your question or was that your comment?
not sure either or. I'm having trouble keeping up with you, Alex, on some of this.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't novice, right?
Well, maybe I am.
No, you have to understand that we have to change our point of view here. And what is really, really, really holding us back is understanding the two-way nature of plasma field interaction. So we have to understand that it's a two-way field plus a residue. And so as such, if we add to that residue, then it becomes stronger. And if we subtract from the residue, then it becomes weaker. Well, how much are you going to subtract? You can subtract enough to the point where you suck the living daylights out of it and it stops being a dynamic plasma field. It comes to a dead stop. And in fact, you could go beyond that. We'll discuss that next week. But the point is how we interact and how we exchange energy. And so if we are successful in keeping the energy flowing, then magic, so-called magic happens. But if we're going to tell the universe to shut up, then you know what? Then the poles are going to have trouble, because they're going to have a hard time maintaining their position, and they're going to really wobble. And you know, our physical society as it is today is in a very wobbly position. And, you know, we're almost wobbling like a alcoholic walking down the street after a night out. So we need to, shall we say, stabilize things on this planet.
But I remember Steph bringing up a question about the pole shift, and is there something to worry about? And Mr. Kesh says, no, this has happened many, many times. I mean, there could be something, but usually he said they see it in the, I guess, the ice cores or something where the Earth went through this shift. But
That's right.
most of us won't feel anything, he said.
That's right. Because in the question, she did not specify which pole.
Well, both of them have to don't. If you have a pole flipping, obviously you can't have both poles on the same side of the sphere. Can you? If the pole flips, does that mean the North Pole takes the place of the South Pole and the South Pole takes the place of the North
That's
Pole?
the point. That's the point, you see, and I thought that was the case, which, you know, would be fairly catastrophic. But as a magnetic pole, well, you know, I flip burgers and I flip pancakes and I flip magnets, and no one got hurt in the process. So, you know, we have to be a little bit more specific with our questions. So she asked a question, if the poles flip, would it be catastrophic? And he says, no, we have the evidence, and that evidence is a magnetical alignment within the Earth's crust. Yeah. So when you did that core sample, you could literally see the difference in the polarity of the elements. And so we know that the elements are made the same way. But do we know, have we ever discussed if the Earth has a North Pole and a North Magnetic Pole? What about gold? Does it have two poles? And what about us? Do we have poles? So, you know, I'm asking too many questions and not getting enough answers, because we've opened up a new cat box here.
Right. So does the plasma have a pole? I mean, everything is a plasma, but when you think of the plasma ball, I mean, these principal matters, transition matters, and matter matters all seem to be mixed up within this plasma space, let's say.
Exactly.
So how could we have a pole when they're all interchanging, interacting, moving around dynamically? I thought it had to be more steady or something to make that pole.
Well, excellent. So here's the proof of concept. If you go jump in the lake, okay, you're going to make a big splash, right? If you take a jackhammer to a piece of concrete, you're going to have a crushing effect, right? If you blow up a balloon, that balloon's going to get bigger. But as the moon rotates around the planet, we don't see any eddy currents. We don't see any wind, right? We don't see any flames coming out from its energy field. It just rotates around as a satellite, right? So it is rotating through an in-between space that doesn't have atmosphere. It is in a vacuum condition, but it is still part of Earth space. So these are all different energy states within the range on this visible plane. But once we get into the plasma state, we can clearly see that there is a interaction without disruption. There's an interaction with a consequence, but in other words, you can take two plasma fields and bring them together and create another product. This is unheard of in normal physics.
Okay, thank you. If I could just interrupt, usually when Alex finishes, I ask if anyone's here for the first time new. I don't see anyone except Alin. Is this someone we know, or would you be so kind to tell us your name, where you're from, and how you found our meeting, unless it's someone that's been here before, just under a different cover? Alin? I thought maybe you'd have time to warm your tea, Alex, in between, or maybe it's not cold enough up there yet.
Oh yeah, there was frost today. Yeah, give me a minute to get some hot tea. Thank you.
Certainly. All right, I hope someone has a question for Alex, more entertaining than my questions, perhaps.
Mark, I
Yes.
have a question for Alex.
Well, he just went to warm his tea. I'm glad you do have a question, so you'll be the first one. I can read what Nikolai wrote in the chat. When I was living in Arizona, I spent 5 months in Sedona, one of these supposed energetic vortexes on the North American continent. It is a gorgeous place with huge deposits of iron oxide in the red rocks. The energy there is indeed very different from other places I've lived. What I found very interesting one day is what Sedona spelled backwards is. It spells anodes. Made me think, who named this place? Do you want to add anything more, Nikolai, or are you maintaining silence in your position because of being late in Europe and you don't want to disturb others? He may not be able to open his mic.
Hey, Mark.
Nikolai, are you still in Europe?
I am. I was just going to say, if I go far enough away to the restroom side of the house, then there's less interference.
Okay, so we have anodes and cathodes, don't we? One
Indeed.
Positive, and so the anode would be the, if you know.
Oh, we have someone's microphone open.
Okay, I'll mute it. So
I missed what you asked.
Anode would be the negative or the positive?
Oh boy, don't trap me in these conundrums, Mark.
Okay, no, I don't know myself. It's very simple. It's one or the other. Probably
Yeah.
Alex is
There's
familiar.
a 50% chance I'll get it right.
Yep.
What I thought it was interesting is that the cathedrals or the cathodes were placed on those other locations. And so I thought how interesting if the cathedrals are being placed on these gravitational energy centers in Europe, as Alex mentioned.
Oh, no, they're not gravitational. They're emission poles.
They're magnetical
Okay.
to make you feel elevated, like when you go up into the mountains or something. Mr. Kesh says
The
you
energy,
lose. Yeah.
yeah, the energy contribution is from the Earth.
Well, there you go. There's my dyslexia at work. So sorry, guys. Don't ask me things with polarities. This is a very important class for me.
So, Alex, are anodes positive or negative?
Yeah, positive.
Okay, so
Because,
the cathode is the negative.
Right, and the cathode is part of the old UFO program.
Okay, so the energy moves from the
gravity, and then it's shot out.
Okay.
It's shot out through repulsion.
And did you hear me reading Nikolai's question?
No, I didn't.
Okay, when I was, and Lisbeth is coming up next. When I was living in Arizona, I spent 5 months in Sedona, one of these supposed energy vortexes on North American continent. It is a gorgeous place with huge deposits of iron oxide in the red rocks. The energy there is indeed very different from other places I've lived. What I found very interesting one day is what Sedona spelled backwards is. It spells anodes. Made me think, who named this place?
Well, that's really cool,
Isn't it?
I just well, let me just isolate the main point that I wanted to put through. So,
okay, just a minute. I just looked up anode, the negative terminal of a voltaic cell or battery. So as you were saying, negative terminal, the magnetical is negative, correct? And the gravitational
magnetical is negative, yes.
Yeah, and the gravitational is positive. So when we come to these ley lines, we're finding magnetical fields or anodes, and they were able to discover this and therefore build the church there. So thereby thinking, if you go to church, for some reason, I just feel better about myself, about the church, about my family, because you're being given magnetical energy, which is an elevator, correct?
This is correct. So thanks for correcting me on that. And
I didn't even know you said it wrong because I was confused. And
well,
who says this is right?
Oh, no, it is right. It's been proven right. It's just that the cathode ray is how the old TVs worked. And so I guess from the point of view of the cathode ray, it's gravitational, and the energy it emits is magnetical. So there. So that coincides with that. So it's an interesting observation that you have more energy there. Where does that energy come from? If that energy is supposedly a North Pole, and you have these various lay points around the world, each of them must be a North Pole.
A mini North Pole.
Yeah, I guess. It's an emission pole. And so the key point being that it contributes to the variety. But, when you look at the knowledge in the past, knowledge was exclusive, right? It was exclusive to druids and the religious leaders, and it was the knowledge was power, right? So this is how they controlled the masses, and so by dominating on these energy vortexes. And how did they know there was an energy vortex? So
Yeah, how did they know?
yeah, did they have some kind of energy measuring device, and were they cave dwellers as we assume? So obviously we were discounting their sophistication, and our history has been totally revised, and so we're trying to sort that out. So this was one of the things that I needed to sort out, because we just don't ask the right questions. Like I say, if we ask, say, which pole, we say pole flipping, we didn't say which pole. And so, when we say the speed of light, we don't say which speed of light, you know, there are differences. So, what's the difference between Earth space and Mars space? It's the same space, it's a physicality, but Earth space is created through different fields. Mars is created through different fields. So that is reflected by its positioning in the solar system, and of course, by the nature of its surface there. So that is representative of field strength and interaction. And these are all the things that Mr. Kesh has been talking about. So now we're at the point where we can explain things in a logical, consistent manner and say, okay, Earth space is a planet, Mars space is a planet, Venus space is a planet. We are all planets, and we're all part of physicality. So if we're part of physicality, first of all, we're not part of the plasma reality, and second of all, we're not part of outer space either. But the rules are the same, because we're all part of the universe. So what is the difference? If the rules are the same and we're all planets the same, so what is the difference? Because we can clearly see the difference. And so when we say electrons, which electron? We say, element, well, which element? Right? And why is one element more dense than another? And then, why is copper and gold in the same category, but gold is more dense? And so all these questions become, because we are incomplete, not only in our questions, but we don't fully answer the questions. We just didn't have the capability for doing that. And so the people who control the scientific community, and it is a controlled community, right? Because by law, by scientific law, if it's verifiable by man-made means, then it's validated. And so plasma science is having difficulty verifying and validating by man-made means until now. Until now, we can go into the space reactors and we can do things that man has only dreamed about. And so these dreams now are coming true. And there is a similarity between the fulfillment of the dreams of what we're seeing in the physical state and the dreams that we have in the sleep state, because they are now working together.
Thank you, Alex. I think Lisbeth had a question for you. Lisbeth, are you still with us? Yes. Lisbeth? So Mr. Cash is telling, oh, she's got her mic open. Okay, she's ready.
Okay. What is the difference, completely difference? In the inner loop, I'm sorry, infinity loop is inside inside the reactors, and plasma loop like North and South Pole. But what is completely difference about infinities?
There is no difference.
Okay.
That's the that's the key to understanding this science. The macro and the micro operate by the same rules. So if your soul, though the way it moves and the way it's been created, and the way it operates follows plasma rules, and then the environment that you operate in also follows plasma rules. But your soul operates at a different energy state than your physicality. So there has to be a ways and means to transition. And the way we do that is through the poles. They gather the energy and they direct that energy. And that energy then, we don't talk about in terms of giving energy magnetically, it's an emission. And that emission comes from within. So if you want peace, then you will emit that energy. And if you want peace and someone is emitting that energy, you will absorb that. So then the converse is true, the opposite is true. If you don't want peace, then you're going to emit something else. And if you don't want peace, you're going to set up a barrier. No. Oh, peace? No. That is not good for my bank account. So the profitability becomes the guide to what you account for or what you discount for. So say, well, it's like if you prepare a meal, you decide what goes in that meal. And at some point in time, you have to make a decision. Do you have everything that you need for that meal? And do you have you put something in that meal, that's not going to work? So you have to exclude that from the meal, right? So you're making that decision. Well, that's the way life is as well. You always have to make a decision. And so when you have the decision, then you have a responsibility. And so now we come to the point where we realize that that capability is also available to us on this planet. So it isn't just a physicality, oh, grab this, grab that, put it in a meal together, whatever works. No, that's the difference between a short order cook and a gourmet chef. $184,000 salary is also the difference, but the gourmet chef deserves that, okay? Because they've gone to school to learn their craft, and they don't just put all the foods together because they taste good. They put them together because they satisfy the palate. They don't cause indigestion, right? They can feed a crowd and everybody will be happy. Everybody will have something to be content with. So care for the customer, care for the neighbor, care for the recipient is all part of the plasma energy. And so the initial feeding hits the target, and then there's a feedback and says, yes, you thank you very much for what you've done. I appreciate it. And we've, had a success.
Excuse me, Alex, just stepping away for 45 seconds to a minute. I'll be right back.
So this feedback is part of the loop, but the loop goes to one side. The loop doesn't leave you because there has to be a connection. And so just because we don't see that connection doesn't mean that it's not there. So this becomes a very key point. If you own a restaurant and you're cooking in the back, you don't see the customers. You have a waiter or somebody seat the customers. right? So you're busy cooking. You don't see the customer. But in your mind, you are making a meal to satisfy your customer, knowing that the satisfaction of the customer will determine how much money you make. So you don't feed the customer based on how much money you make. You feed the customer based on the satisfaction of the customer. This is a key difference from enhancing to draining energy. You know, taking energy at the expense of others. When you give, and you don't care if it's the customer on the table 50 or table 13, it doesn't matter. You treat them all equally. You give them the best food that you can. And guess what? Another thing happens. When you improve your skill and you know how to do something better, then you stop doing what you did before. And that's part of acquiring knowledge. How are we doing, Lisbeth?
Okay,
Thank you,
back.
Alex.
Yeah, did we do okay?
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Guys, can I ask a question about the anode? I just looked it up, and please don't expect me to be really clear on this. It's pictures of, let's say you have a little, maybe a galvanic cell, and it has an electrolyte, and you've got something that is an anode, and it has a wire going up to maybe an LED, and then from the LED, it's going down to the cathode side. On this one, so you got a little light on the top like we do, LEDs and so on, and that means that the anode is negative and the cathode is positive. Then you change and you go to the electrolytic cell, and it's exactly the opposite. You got a little battery in between the two, and the anode becomes positive. It's very interesting. I didn't even think about that. So it depends on what you're doing as to what charge you're going to get, and what direction the flow is in. The direction of the flow stays the same, but it changes from negative to positive, and the other one changes from positive to negative. So very interesting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for bringing that up, because what you've described is the point of view. So if the determination is from the giver, or is it determination from the receiver? And that this is a key point, and it's led to all this confusion. And so one of the things that has stabilized my understanding of the science, negative is the giver, and the magnetical is the giver, and the magnetical is the emission pole. Those are all the same, and the point of view is from the source.
Well, I just got a very pleasant phone call. I made a patch for someone on Friday, friend of mine, known him for 40 years. And of course, they haven't been very positive about the cache technology and so on, but I did make a pain patch, one of Gianni's recommendations, a weaker and a stronger CO2 and zinc, three sprays on the one of both and 6 sprays on the other of both. And I gave him a 2 choices, 3 on one and 6 on the other, and then 3 on another one and 9 on the other. Well, he just called me and said that He had his knee done. Well, I knew that, but anyway, it's causing him some hip pain now. I guess he had an artificial knee put in, and maybe it's not aligned perfectly correctly, but ever since he's been having some hip issues. So he just called me and I told him I'd call later. Maybe I'll bring that testimonial, as I understand it, into the testimonials meeting for tomorrow. But that was quite delightful. That's 2 people in the last 2 weeks that I used that patch for, and one of them said it helped temporarily. And then again, they said it didn't help, but this friend of mine, he said that it worked. So I'll find out more later, but that was a very nice thing. And again, did it even cost a penny? And of course, the doctor is telling him, well, you know, you may want to go in for a hip replacement now. So we'll see how it works. I guess his wife had some pain as well, but she's even more negative about the technology. So it didn't, he says, oh, nothing works for her. And of course, I think you have to want it to work in a way, just the way you can block the system. As Mr. Kesh said, that people come in and they want to be in control and they block the system. But even though the fields are still working on them, but I thought that was a very nice phone call to get during the meeting.
Mark, may I say a few words? It's Dean here.
Of course.
Hi, Dean.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everybody. Just going back, the conversation and the teachings went back a little bit while, and it's something rung a note. And so that was where I was positioned, where I grew up, in where I was from a small child, very small, from a baby actually. That little town that I've mentioned before had, for a very small town, had a very, very large church right at the top of the town. And it was more like a cathedral, a small cathedral, and it was very out of place compared to all the other places around and many places across. So there's obviously, if you're talking about ley lines, there's obviously a center of there's a center of a ley line across these lands. And the lands where I grew up, there are an extraordinary large amount of these anomalies and energies that flow across the lands. I know this. I grew up around this area and experienced it many times when I was smaller, and as I grew up in this environment. And I know that many of these key places have very specific enforcements around them. There's many places I know that have been. There's one in well, not one. There's many, but there's one on Salisbury Plain. I know that it's now covered in, and it has been for a very long time, covered in tank movements, and it's all sealed off to the public and no one can get in there. But I do know that there are extensive ley lines and all sorts of things going on there that are sort of placed into the background so people cannot get to them. There are many other places around where I grew up that have these very specific energy forces that have materialized as lumps and bumps and all sorts of conditions. And I know that around the area as well, there were very many ancient druid activities and other things that happened going back many years. So it was interesting you spoke about that. And I know that there are also a lot of different minerals and deposits all around the area from all different field strength, a very big spectrum. And it's ancient lands, like a lot of, like the whole of the earth, ancient lands that there are many assets to it that are hidden away. And these nodes, these ley lines are put in a position that that no one can actually use them as the superhighways that they once were, put it that way. So that was interesting you spoke about that. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. And another thing that just struck me as a thought a little while ago was being positioned near churches and things. And recently, for quite some time now, I've experienced ringing, like a ringing, a soul ringing in the physicality. And a thought came to me that when the bells ring, they create a certain tone, a certain condition that is this how the physicality or the soul of man is can be sung to, trapped in by some certain positions on these ley lines, these notes. When they ring this note, does this send out a field strength around the grid that locks it in? It was just a thought that came to me.
Interesting point, Dean. Are those bells then gravitational? I know Mr. Kesh said it's God calling for money, but there may be a gravitational effect in those sounds.
Most
Pulling
definitely,
you
yeah.
towards
Most
the
definitely.
structure.
Most definitely, Mark. There's much more to this. It may have maybe now have become a money thing, but before that, when it was before this happened, they were very specific, as you spoke about, ley lines, energy positions, and they still are. And yeah, and of course they've been recognised and over quite a long period of time been turned into something else. And then when you intensify that with prayers, and when you intensify that with souls gathering and giving a belief from their self, from their soul, they're feeding the grid. They're feeding this this system, this structure, without even realizing. And if you are then spoken or told something about this through a book or something else that that tells you something else that has been changed many times, it may have been a truth to begin with, but then, as we know, when stories are told, they gather momentum and they change completely. They flip from one side to the other within a very short. From if you have three people telling a story, you'll know that by the time the third person tells it, it's almost completely changed. So, and it makes me wonder how, not makes me wonder, it makes me realize how this condition that we have, not across the whole planet, and I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but it does, it does kind of explain, and it's a thought, a soul intuition that it explains a lot of the positions we have and why this particular knowledge was spread so quickly around the planet, and why it was utilized to circumnavigate the planet and spread the word, which has a field strength, and how we speak about humanity being has locked themselves in. And maybe this is a possibility of how and why. Just one, it's just a thought of how it could have happened. Anyway, there you go. There's some thoughts, some intuition for you.
So Mr. Kesh keeps asking us to try to see the fields, but is he really saying try to feel the fields? How could these people, and we saw what happened with a rod, Mr. Kesh showed a video as the dowsing rod, as he turned his head, the rod went that way, he turned his head the other way. So how did they discover this global ley line structure? And I was just thinking, I know Mr. Kesh said we built 14 pyramids on this planet. One was destroyed and one is yet to be discovered. Could this be some ancient, not because I haven't been able to see the fields. Maybe he means feel the fields. Is that what he's thinking, Dean? Or is it because I can't see the fields?
Yeah, some people may be able to see them. There are certain people who claim to, and maybe have um, uh, an ability in their physicality to see things. You know, see the aura of these, or the field strength of this.
Well,
Many people do sense it. They do sense it. I do remember. Sorry, Mark. I do remember when I was from my birthplace, that there are many things that are felt and sensed around those lands, and it's the same in the whole of Europe and across the whole planet, across many places on the planet, where people they understand a field strength and they become part of that structure. They tune into it, and it's like somatics and things. You know how things grow if you put a certain tune into it, how the matter state grows around it in a certain way. It could be the same with these field strengths, these feelings. This how certain groups of individuals grow into look a certain way, or shape a certain way. This field strength materializes in the around the core, and has certain attributes and conditions. Yeah, it's all at the moment, from what we see, it's 2 arms and 2 legs mostly, and eyes and things. But in this condition, in the generalized condition of the planet, which has a certain field strength within the materials and minerals and the amino acid. However, that still changes slightly from place to place in little pockets that have certain other field strengths and deposits of other minerals and other, conditions, I should say, field strengths that materialize through the locality of the local environment. So this it explains quite a lot, really.
Well, it was interesting where Mr. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I just wanted to clarify when he made the reference that we've built these pyramids. He didn't say who we were. The overriding element here to consider is that we are part of the universal community, and we're all part of the same process. So that there's no superiority and inferiority. Our interpretation of the history has been from a point of inferiority. And so when we look at these ley lines, the fascination with them, it is that someone knew them, and because of that knowledge, they exercised their superiority over us. And this is now is going to stop, because the balance of knowledge has shifted, and it is welcome on both sides, you see. And that's the key point, and this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that the relationship between where we are and where we're going, there's a question of which is the one that is stable and which is the one that is moving. And so I submit that it's the magnetical pole that is moving, and I submit that the evidence that shows that it is the ley lines, because it's the Earth is rotating around the north axis, and is not rotating around the ley lines. So we're looking at the difference between the physical science and the plasma science. So the rotation of the planet is a physical manifestation, and the emission poles of the vortexes are plasmatic energy. But that plasmatic energy is not of the same field strength as the magnetic North Pole. That field strength is even greater. So, but the rules are the same. And so now we have to decide, what do we take into account? It's not good enough to say, oh, well, you know what, man is stupid and we're going to control man because we have this additional knowledge about, where we have the strength. and how we're going to exercise control. So that's the difference. The universal community doesn't operate that way, and so that's the difference between self-enhancement and robbing and stealing from others.
And interesting, Mr. Kesh said he walked into the area that the team was putting together the new systems, and he said the person looked like a ball of light, apparently, and he said that ball is your soul if you decide what you interact with. And he said he could see the plasmas going from the system to the person and from the person back to the system. So that is really seeing the fields.
Mark, if I can jump in for a sec.
Do you want me to read what you wrote in the chat, Nikolai? The second.
Oh,
I didn't get to that.
I actually forgot about that, but you
okay,
can...
go right ahead. No, go right ahead. While we have you. Thank you.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was actually one of the most interesting experiences that I had watching Mr. Kesh in Linz when we were in the center. At the very tail end of our time in the room, he had me stand in the middle of the two systems and put my friend Sasha in the back of the sending and receiving unit and put his girlfriend Zoa in the back of the receiving only unit. And he asked me to just stay in the middle of the room. And what was interesting for me was I got to watch him. And he was like a little kid in a candy store. It was really funny. But he was buzzing all around, looking at all of his different reactors in different ways, as if he could see the fields, and then would make commentary to me saying, oh, would you look at that? Hey, can you see that thing over here? Or isn't that interesting? Or did you see that? And I'm looking back towards him from my position, kind of standing in the middle of the room, not wanting to move, but also not seeing what he was describing. And what was fascinating for me was just to watch him in this playground, because it really was that for him. And at the time of the experiment, what he had asked Sasha to do, because he was in the unit that could send and receive, Zoa was in the unit that could only receive, but both of them were locked out, so to speak. They were both in the back of the units where there was no headgear. So they're in the passenger seats of both of these units. And he asked them to essentially send each other something. And I think it was more just love and care. And I think Sasha was trying to tickle his girlfriend and give her kisses or something to that effect. But what Mr. Kesh wound up doing was locking each system out from the other, so that the field flows of these individuals was actually going to themselves. So there was no way for Sasha to send his love and care and tickles to his girlfriend, and there was no way for her to send whatever she was responding with to him. Meanwhile, the system that Mr. Kesh was looking at was the one that was the sending and receiving unit, the one with my friend Sasha in the back of. And there's a little device that was ticking and making all kinds of ticking sounds. And he was fascinated by this. He was just like really like a little kid. And I bet you he sees everything there, because I don't think it's a feeling of the fields for him. He said actually in one moment that Klaus was very receptive to the fields and that he could sense the fields very strongly. But I really feel like there is a different, perhaps it's a different structure within the amino acids of his body, within his retinas or his cones in his eyes, to see different fields. Perhaps it's an exposure period, or it's just the knowledge of what to look for and how subtle it might be. And but yeah, I just thought I'd add that.
Right. He said, well, this transmutation, he said, I can already do. The transmutation is for you to understand, but he said, I can already do, which we all already know, but he said it's for us lot in a way, because he said, I can already do.
Yeah, he can't be the one to do it for us. Otherwise, we wind up back in the same conditions we've been in on this planet for a long time. But through the people that are there building the systems, who are apparently not knowledge seekers, but far more quick to learn than some of us who don't get our hands on these devices with an expert looking over our shoulders, are doing something very different on our side. But anyway, I thought I would just add that to the discussion.
Okay, then I'll read what you put in the chat at 5 o'clock, about 5. And then there's the hungry chef who prepares the meal, pouring their love into every bite of the presentation and the taste and the combinations on the palate. And by the time they are finished cooking, they realize that they too are completely satisfied or satiated, I think the word is.
Yeah, that was something I've done before. Cooked hungry and then finished cooking and thought, I don't actually need to eat. That's weird. And then, of course, because I'm a greedy human and still live by these rules, thought, oh, well, I can't possibly let this all go to waste, and then gorge on the food and then feel, like I've got a big belly and need to lay down on the couch for a while. But I always thought that was interesting. And we talk about the smells being plasmatic fields, and we talk about the scent of the rose and all of these other energies that we perceive with all of our different senses. They're all these different energies that we can interact with. Yet we seem to still think that the only way to get energy and to keep ourselves alive is to continue to consume. But yeah, that's something I've just noticed in my own experience.
Nikolai, may I ask you a question? It's Dean here.
Of course.
So how is your appetite now?
It's been decreasing already the last 2 years, I'd say. Generally, I don't eat more than one meal a day. I still drink coffee in the morning with my salt. And and then I'll eat some dark chocolate, and usually have my one meal at dinner time. And yeah, lunch has gone rather quickly out the window. And for years, it was actually about the same. And since being in LIMS, yeah, it's hard to tell. I think it's gotten less, but it hasn't been a huge difference. I do still enjoy cooking, and that's been kind of one of the things I've always loved to do. So it's a little bit funny.
No, the shopping cart was already shrinking before you went to LIMS, let's say.
It was definitely marked. Yeah, that was, I think, around 2019, 2020, somewhere in there. I just began removing one meal a day as best I could, and sometimes that would happen, and otherwise sometimes it didn't. And I was still working as a carpenter and a painter and many different kind of construction related jobs, and so it was it was be often out the door with a black coffee and home for dinner, and maybe there would be a lunch, maybe there wouldn't be, and if there was, it was often a Vietnamese noodle soup with basically just broth. So I've been shrinking for a little bit, Mark.
Nikolai, I just wanted to ask you a question about Sasha's experience. You said he was was he the only one that was, if he could pretend to send, that he was closed off? So does that mean that it would stay inside and then he would be tickled by himself and whatever else he was trying to send to his sweetheart? I'm just curious as to whether he experienced anything that he was trying to send to her.
That's exactly what happened. And what's very funny, Gail, is the moment you mentioned his name, he called me just now.
Oh.
So that's funny. I just had to say no to the call. But
Synchronicity. Synchronicity.
yeah. Who was it? Were you listening or was he listening?
Good question.
But
Souls were interacting. Yeah.
there you go. That's the answer, Mark. But no, it was exactly as you described. He was locked out of his giving to her. And what I found really fascinating about this experience was Sasha has had this one very profound ego death experience that he's described to me before, where he basically was with
What are you calling it, Nikolai?
This was maybe a year or 6 months before we met. He had a ego death that he felt very strongly, and so this was something
that before. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll explain a little. He was walking with a friend of his and one of his teachers, a man he calls his spiritual dad, and they were walking in a gorgeous place somewhere, and he turned to his friend and said, "Paul, I think I'm dying." And this is a man in his early 40s, and Sasha is. And Paul turned to him and said, "It's okay. We've all died before." And in that moment, Sasha collapsed, and Paul caught him. And Sasha had an experience of knowing that he is God and knowing that we are all one forever and ever and ever and ever. And he came back into the body, looked up with his eyes open, and asked his friend, "Am I dead?" And he said, "No. The old you died, but you're still here." He looked at him again and said, "Is this heaven?" Paul said, "No, you're still here." For weeks after this, Sasha couldn't sleep. For weeks, he would wake up in the middle of the night. He had to sleep between his spiritual dad and his spiritual mom, so to speak, in their bed for a few nights, because he would wake up and screaming in terror every time he fell asleep into this dream state, because he would remember that he was one with everyone and how unbelievable that was and all of the rest. So this massive spiritual ego death experience that he had was the culmination of years of seeking for self-knowledge and self-realization. It didn't just happen, but he was looking, and then he stopped looking after that happened. But what was fascinating for me, because I've heard the story from him, is watching him, Sasha, in the unit in the back of the room, trying to send Zoa tickles and kisses and love and all the rest, and having them literally feed back into the system. And this little detector that was in the middle of that unit was just going tick, 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 tick. I don't know if it's a detector, but something was making a very repetitive ticking sound. And Kesh was far more interested in Sasha's unit than he was in Zoa's. He walked over to the other side, checked hers out a few times, but was far more interested in his. And I made a mention of the sound, and he said, "Oh, yeah, something along the lines of, it's making a lot of noise, isn't it?" And then he mentioned what he did about trying to see the fields and all these other things. So for me, that was really fascinating. It was one of the most interesting parts of that experience in the end. I mean, it was all fascinating, but that was particularly interesting for me.
And what was the point of you standing between the systems?
I think to remove me from either of them as best as he could.
Okay.
To put me in the midpoint where it would have been, I mean, that's my guess. It's also where he had us stand in the very beginning, actually. If I remember correctly, on that same day, he had the three of us stand right between the two units and face each other with our, maybe shoulder to shoulder, basically in a triangle. And at one point, Zoa asked if we wanted to hold hands, and so we held hands in the middle of the room at the beginning of that day. And yeah, there was another thing that happened in that interesting interaction. But from my position as the knowledge seeker, I thought, oh, he's putting us in a star formation to put a free plasma in the middle. And at a certain point, once I had given into, I'd become aware that I was blocking this exchange of energy from happening between the three of us. And so I started sending energy from my right hand into Sasha's hand. And then immediately after that, had an experience of watching our light bodies just lift up off the ground and go up, and had a very quick experience within, I don't know how many, maybe 30 seconds, but lots happened in that experience. So that central point of the room wasn't like it was a nothing point, but I think it was his way of kind of putting me as far away as possible, or maybe he wanted me to watch. I don't know. we were guinea pigs that day, so I have no idea what his intentions were all the way through.
Wow, he obviously wanted to isolate Sasha in that and allow him to do something and then see if Sasha could feel. And if you're too close, you might have interfered somehow, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So I think he asked me just to stay still in the middle to keep each side of the room in its own energy. But I got to watch, so that was fascinating.
And of course, this is what Mr. Kesh is doing, developing these systems, this testing. He's not always telling us exactly what he's testing for or why he's doing certain things on the control panel or whatever he's doing in the background. But the more people that come in, the better I think the system can be tested. And so that's why it's very important to encourage everyone to take a trip to Linz if they can at all afford it, or if they're in the proximity, even if you've been there before, he said.
Yeah,
Mark?
everybody adds their own into the adds their knowledge into the systems, and
Right,
that's what's
but
so
it's
gorgeous about this, is like somebody who had that experience like Sasha will show Mr. Kesh something, whether or not Mr. Kesh is aware of him having that experience or not. He gets to learn from that and then goes, oh wow, my system can handle this, or it can't, or it's going overload, or it's doing something crazy. So yeah, at some point it'd be interesting if Sasha shares some of his story with Mr. Kesh, and whether he puts the pieces together or not is another thing, but hey.
right. And this is for all of us to be able to enjoy basically a very seamless system. This is why he's doing such extensive testing, I believe, there, so that when he does deliver the system, as he said, the leg won't be here and everything will, you know, work properly. So when he actually delivers the system to us, we can start having a little bit of fun with it.
Mark, Nick, I'll just quickly say something. So I haven't been present there. I know the system. You mentioned this noise, and I do know that depending on whether you are taking or giving, this noise intensifies, and the system can grow or go the other way, depending upon the energy that's been put in or taken, extracted out from the system. It's also interesting that I've noticed that some people that go in there and come out after their experience, some people need to release in certain ways, and that can be emotionally. It could be extremely emotional, or it can be physically, as in they need to go to toilet. So the system is interacting with the field strength, is interacting with their bodies in many different ways, and I'm sure that to all, not just the souls that are present within, because I'm sure those fields are radiating out around. I'm sure the whole vicinity that's aware and tapped in and tuned into this has an influence on the field strength that happens with the souls that are present in those moments. And maybe not, maybe I'm completely wrong there. Maybe they're actually contained within their own sphere of influence in their own little universe, and perhaps the other universes do not interact. Could be both. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dean, for joining us, and you're always adding to the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, I know there was a small teaching by Mr. Kesh, and I'm going to find it and send it to you on the infinity loop and the plasma loop, and see if maybe you'll bring your understanding next week. Hopefully I can find where it is in the archives.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and then you can open that up a little bit for us. Okay.
Can you put that link into the chat?
No,
It's not.
no, I think it's in the archive, the student portal.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You were probably there, Gail, and I don't remember the exact
I'm
explanation.
not sure. Is that the November 4th one?
It could be,
or...
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But we'll see if we can bring that, and Alex may explore that this week and bring us something a little bit, add more to it, let's say.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank all of you for being here and for bringing the change. Who else? Is there anything? Okay, before we go there, let me ask, I see Alin. I'm going to ask you again. Can you tell us your name? Maybe it is Alin, and where you're from and how you found our meeting. I see you have a B moniker next to your name. Is it someone we know already? No problem. You may be a little shy or not near his mic at the moment when I'm asking. Anything else before we end the meeting? We're heading towards midnight in Europe.
Hello, Mark.
Yes, sir.
I just did a little modification on the picture here, and with the arc, I was just showing the travel of the pole as it might wobble, say from the 0 degrees to 90 degrees, or from, say, if it's 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. But the path, if you follow the yellow lines, you'll find that they kind of collapse around 1:30, and then they come back up to 3 o'clock. So this is how we have the differences in the field interaction. If we're looking at the interaction of the two poles, and then we can see that the field strength varies as the pole wobbles. And then, so this is what I'm drawing attention to. I want to show how the product that we get in terms of physicality is manifested through the field strength of the fields that contribute, and they're forever changing. And so depending on the stability, I guess, is determined by the quantity. But as the fields move, that interaction field strength changes. I just wanted to show that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to thank you again for leading a very beautiful session. And I want to thank all the participants here for allowing me to present them. I really appreciate all your contributions today. It's make this trip on Sundays a most pleasurable journey. So thank you all, and I hope to see you next week when we do some rotation.
Okay, well, I'm not leading anything, but we're just trying to inspire others in a way. It's for them to take from the knowledge. And again, if you feel like you're toddlers in the nursery of the knowledge of the universe, that's exactly the way Mr. Kesh coined it. I feel the exact same way as a toddler in the nursery of the knowledge of the universe because it is so immense. Each little field, each little interaction changes things, and I don't know how to pick out one cosmic ray from another, but this is what we're learning to do somehow. Nikolai again says, where the fields cross looks like about 1.6 times approximately the golden ratio point. I think that was for you, Alex.
Yes, and that ratio is the ratio between kilometers and miles.
Alex, that the miles and the kilometers will have, you're right, will have very direct meaning in physicality and probably other meanings as well. The mile that has been in place and stayed in position in the UK, and I believe in other places, will have a very direct correspondence to many different field strengths that interact and bring about certain, as I said, that field strength that creates. And when you are traveling on this certain distance preset, when you cross that point, it triggers something. And when you change that value and put it to another value, you're creating another pathway, another field strength that leads to somewhere completely different. So I know that's in a matter condition, but I believe that may transcend and may transform into a plasmatic condition as well, that leads possibly round in a different configuration that may lead you into other golden ratios, other conditions that may bring you back to a point continuously. That's just an interactional thought, anyway.
Yeah, Dean, the reason I brought it up, and it was just an aside, it wasn't supposed to be the main course, but that's okay. The thing is that in Canada here, we converted from miles to kilometers, and it was a massive debate. And the debate that we couldn't understand is, why do we have to change from miles to meters? Why doesn't Europe change from meters to miles? And then when you look at the distances between the cathedrals and how they were placed, and you find that as the crow flies, that they were ticked off in increments of a mile and not in increments of kilometers. And that was kind of strange as well. So in order for them to kind of hide this fact, it was better for Canada to convert to kilometers. And the US, of course, didn't do that, right, Mark?
Right, I'm still trying to figure out how big a hectare is.
A hectare is 2.4 acres.
Okay.
Alex, just quickly, just whilst you just triggered another thought. So when you were saying about as the crow flies, I went to the exhibition a little while ago, and there were many, many, many crows that flew in front of my path, and as I was driving up to the place. So it's funny how the souls interact, and I've had this interaction with the birds and crows since I was a small boy. So yeah, interesting that cropped up.
Well, I got a question for you, Dean.
Yeah.
How could you tell the old birds from the young birds?
I don't know. You have to tell me.
Okay, the young birds would fly away as you were approaching. The old birds would walk away.
Yeah.
Well, because they knew the difference between the shoulder of the road and the asphalt road. They trusted you that you would stay on the asphalt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they would They were
It's-
used to. Go
It's
ahead.
funny. It's funny you say that though, Alex, because many times I go into the mountains, into the forests and things around here, and I have crows that squawk and fly above me and seem to be present at certain moments when I'm contemplating things with myself. So yeah, there's a possibility that they have certain positions as well. Certain there's always certain souls that are present with us in our moments when we are in a certain field strength.
Well, this again came up. You triggered something for me as well. And so when we talk about inferior races, you could say that, the crows are bird brains, but clearly the crows watch and they learned. So, it must have been in crow language, they must have had massive debates as to, well, why are these guys staying only on that part? They don't drive on that part. And, the roadkill that we want to get is on that part. So we have to wait for them to pass. Then we go and we eat. And when the car is coming, oh, gee whiz, we got to get out of the way. And so they're somewhat bored. It would be a very interesting discussion. But there's another bird that I would run into in my drives, and it would absolutely insist on crossing the road directly in front of me. So, in other words, it would come below my roof line in front of me, and it would basically wait to the last possible minute. And I thought, well, wait a second. When I come, the crow runs off the road. You want to cross the road directly in front of me. And then I found out the reason why is because the nest is where the bird is, and they want to attract my attention and away from the nest. Yeah, these are bird brains, right? Anyway, what an interesting topic. So thanks again, everybody.
And those bird brains can remember where they buried thousands of seeds. Most humans can't remember where their car keys are.
Well, isn't that something?
Well, the squirrels are going to have to take a lesson from the crows then, because they only remember about half of where they buried the nuts.
That's exactly right. So by that definition, birds are smarter than squirrels.
While we have Dean here, Nikolai has put a question in the chat. Dean, just curious if you can tell us, why has Mr. Kesh kept you out of the flight room, so to speak? Have you been given a particular reason, or is it a personal matter? I know Dean had said before, if he goes into the system, he may not come back. Now, I don't know if I heard that wrong, but
that was a feeling that I had, Mark, quite some time ago. And so I brought that field strength with me that then may have manifested that Mr. Kesh said that you're not ready to go in. He never said that to me as such like that, but however, that may be the way it is. I don't know. So that question, Nikolai, I can't actually tell you. It's other than what I've just said. It is that. I know that the interactions I've had and I've experienced through the energies that have come out and all around, I've felt the souls and felt the field strength of the interactions. And like I said, I've mentioned this before. I had many interactions where when people came out, I was looking at the camera and then I went to look up at them. And I have to wear glasses because I have a condition where I need to wear my glasses for close-up work. And then when I took the glass off and I looked at them, whether it was that or whatever, I don't know. But sometimes I just could not focus on these souls that came out and I was interviewing. My eyes just could not focus at all. It was like there was an extremely incredible energy there that my physicality just couldn't focus on, and it took quite some moments for it to come back so that I could actually start to operate again. So I've experienced it. I know about it, and it's also Mr. Kesh has mentioned it, that all you beautiful souls that are going in there, you're all here for a reason. You're all a part of this. And Mr. Kesh has said he's worked with all the souls and known them for a very long time. Has worked with them before. So there will be reasons and many conditions, known and unknown, on a soul level and unknown on a physicality level. So other than that, who's to say?
Thank you, Dean. Maybe the universal community is looking for another photographer or videographer, and you may take them up on that. So we need you in Linz.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, maybe. We should see. We should see.
Yeah.
Well, those visitors are anxious to get out of the spaceship, aren't they?
They're already out, aren't they, Mark? Alex?
Well, I don't know. You were there. did you give them a passport? Did you write it on a hanky?
Yeah, I'm not just on about. I'm on about in general across the planet. As we know, Mr. Kesha said many times, many. I think he said up to a third of people are not from here. So, and that was funny enough. That leads me to yet another little story. I don't know why I'm going to say this, but so when I was, we spoke about those that cathedral earlier on. I remember being a child, and after I went to like the church as a small child. There were certain things you had to go through. You were taken there, and I was there for a while. And I always remember one of the times I went on holiday with my parents and then came back, and they wanted to put me as one of the characters in this biblical thing, and they want to do blacken my face and turn me into something. And I distinctly remember I did not want to do this at all, and it really upset me, and I didn't get to play this position. However, that ties into everything that Mr. Kesh has said about the color of the skin and the positions and what may have happened with this particular character. So it's strange how all these little coincidences, once you put them together on a level, you start putting the picture together, how certain things interact, and it's quite incredible, really. It's
they weren't
certainly a soul journey
coincidences anymore.
Yeah, it's lots of. Is there any coincidence? Yeah, or is it one big coincidence? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's see if we can wrap it up before midnight in Europe. Is there anyone else who'd like to bring something, share something? Ask a question. Okay, the testimonials are coming up on Monday at 8 p.m. CET. So bring your testimonials to Rick's monthly testimonial meeting. And that's, of course, in the public Zoom room, 939-474-503. Tuesday, of course, we have the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for World Peace. Wednesday, we have the reactor group, and I'm not counting any of the language community teachings. Also, the Brazilian team does the intentions at, I think, 6 p.m. on Wednesday. You can join them if you'd like to do that. And that's at 6 p.m., I think, CET. Reactor group, 7 a.m. Wednesday, CET. Thursday, of course, is the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. And Friday is the public teaching in the Portuguese language. And there are many other activities going in and around the Kesh Foundation. And as I said, this is the best place to be on the planet, in and around the Kesh Foundation. So depending on how much you want to share or serve or interact, it's all, everything is left up to you. Thank you all. And as I said, contact me in the Telegram if there's any way you'd like to put any funds forward for sponsoring someone. And we don't have to sponsor someone from the United States or anything. We're just going to hand the funds over to the foundation, and they will then choose whoever they'd like to bring in, because without this testing, the systems will not be fully developed. If they're not fully developed, they will not be fully released. So the ball is in our court. Alex, I'm going to take the screen, play the message for humanity, and then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will close. Anyone else?
I just put something in the chat, Mark, but yeah, perhaps it's for another day. I just
Oh,
had
go right
noticed
ahead.
something. Yeah, no, I had noticed something
I'm
with
just
the
gonna set this
ancient
up.
structures around the planet, and many ancient statues around the planet have had their nose defaced. And again, I would find pictures of ancient looking artifacts from perhaps the Egyptian time or another time, and oftentimes the nose would be broken.
Uh-huh. We've seen this.
And what is the difference of beings in the black skin is oftentimes identified by the nose. So if you break the nose off all these beings, can you then tell the world that these people were white or from Europe or from any other place? So I thought, when I saw somebody put that together, I thought, wow, that's actually quite interesting.
Well,
So many of these
remember,
ancient structures were perhaps built by the beings who were here.
right, and
At the time.
remember, Nikolai, when Mr. Kesh said the green that the plant gives off is what they cannot hold on to, correct?
Indeed, the emission.
Okay. So if the people from Africa, let's say, they cannot hold on to what? The black color. And the pink people, or what they call the white people, cannot hold on to the pink or white color. So if you think about that, who is white and who is black? And of course, we don't go with any races or religions or anything like that, but just think about that for a moment. What is emitted is what that entity can't hold on to, at least in color wise. So who is who and what is what? If you're following what I'm alluding to.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
What you emit is what you are. What you reflect is what you are not.
Okay, but we saw the plant cannot hold the green. And so those fields are available for you to absorb and convert into energy. So when we see a black person, are those the color is what they cannot hold on to, as I understand it. Now, remember, we asked about the blue jeans. Are the blue jeans blue? No.
No, every other color. And the plants are not green.
Correct.
So what they are is what they emit. And that what they emit is what you absorb. And that's why, we eat the plants. If you say, oh, go into the grocery store and imagine all the plants you get there are green. And then someone says, well, go eat the green one. You say, well, which one is that? And then you pick one. So you wouldn't pick it by color, would you? You'd pick it by some other reason. Oh, I like the shape, or I like the smell, or, I feel the energy coming from the plant. That's the difference between the plasma reality and the physical reality. So anyway, but the emission and the reflection are two separate things. So the emission is plasmatic, the reflection is physical.
Okay. Very good. Thanks for that clarification. And thank you all, including Alex, of course, for being here today, Dean, and everyone else who's interacted. Nikolai, And whether you interacted on the physical level or you've just been quiet interacting on the soul level, it's all good. So thank you all for being here. You're part of bringing the change to this planet, as we all are. And we're going to play this message to humanity. And this, again, if you start to see the UFOs in the sky, it's not one or two anymore, as he said, but hundreds. The souls are returning. And some of the old souls are returning and other souls are returning and so on and so forth. So this is all getting ready for the party that is planned on this planet. Obviously, it's gone out through the universal community that there is a huge change coming to this planet. And again, I don't have any exact timing, but the change is here. They're aware of it and they want to join us for the party. Let's make sure I am sharing correctly before we start the sound and the video. And we'll play this final disclaimer, meeting will end. Thank you all for attending and sharing your time and your knowledge with all of us. Thank we.